I am Pareño and I'm going to discuss about 8.3 Understanding of Internal Controls and Documentation. First, I have to discuss the three components of audit risk. Audit risk meaning the auditor gives a wrong opinion based on the evidences. While the three components of audit risk include the inherent risk, detection risk, and last is the control risk. First, inherent risk, from the word inherent, meaning it's already there, it's already existing in the business environment, thus increases the likelihood that the accounts will be misstated. So, an example of inherent risk is that an inherent risk in a heavily regulated industry and the company will not follow the regulations. And another example is using or setting up of cash register to avoid the inherent risk of theft for cash or money. Second is the detection risk. Auditor will not catch a material misstatement, and it is the only component of audit risk that can be influenced by the auditors. And the last is the control risk, meaning a risk that these controls will not be prevented, detected, or corrected on a timely basis by the accounting and internal control systems. Example for this is cash register is not used or it has malfunctions. So, kaya siya nandito sa control risk is that once na ang cash register, which is the control used by the organization, if the cash register is not used or it has malfunctions, so the possible misstatements will not be prevented or detected or even corrected because the cash register was not used. And next is the auditor assesses control risk based on the perceived effectiveness of the entity's internal control system in preventing or detecting material misstatements. So, if the organization's internal control system becomes more effective, then the assessments of auditor to the level of control risk should decrease. So, ibig sabihin, the more na mas maganda ang internal control system ng isang company or organization, ang assessment ng auditor sa level of control risk ay mababawasan. And next is the audit approach. The auditor first evaluates the internal control environment as well as the accounting and internal control systems because the audit approach relies heavily on internal control. So, generally, if an auditor relies on the internal controls of an organization, then he can reduce the substantive test. Substantive tests are the activities performed by the auditors in detecting material misstatements or fraud at assertion level. But, if the organization has no internal controls or a weaker internal controls, then the auditors would rely on the substantive test to provide the audit evidences. Next is the procedures to obtain an understanding. These are procedures used by the auditor to gather evidences about the design and placement in operation of specific control policies and procedures. So, the procedures to obtain an understanding focus attention on both the design of relevant policies, procedures, and records and whether they have been placed in operation by the entity. For the illustration, take a look at the illustration 8.2. It shows some factors considered in making a judgment about the nature and extent of these procedures in obtaining an understanding of internal control system. For the illustration 8.2, let's take this first example. The example factor for previous experience with the entity, knowledge of prior misstatements, the effect on the nature of procedures. Procedures focus on the changes, if any, in the internal control structure to correct problems. Ibig sabihin, since alam na ni company or ng organization na nagkaroon ng prior misstatements, ang gagawin nila ay babaguhin or mai-improve sila sa internal control structure nila to correct the problems para ma-avoid yung future misstatements or para hindi na maulit yung nangyaring misstatements dati. And the effect on the extent of procedures, focus procedures to limit their extent. Ibig sabihin is yung area ay lilimitahan nila to secure para hindi na maulit-ulit yung nangyaring misstatements.